My name is Jerome Haskell. I am 66 years old, and I spent 32 years as an electrical engineer for Memphis Light, Gas, and Water, long enough to understand that the most dangerous currents are the ones you cannot see. I thought I had left that kind of careful watchfulness behind when I hung up my hard hat for the last time. I was wrong. My son-in-law thought I was a tired old man who had finally let his guard down. He had been watching me for 2 years, cataloging my habits, measuring my weaknesses, waiting for the right moment. He thought that moment had come. What he didn't know, what he could not have known, was that I had been watching him back. And what he found when he finally made his move didn't just stop him cold. It connected him to a shame his family had spent nearly 60 years trying to bury. I didn't call the police. I didn't need to. By the time I was done, the truth itself had done everything I could have asked of a judge and jury, and then some. Before I tell you how a voice recorder, a sealed envelope, and a piece of Memphis history unraveled a greedy man, I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. And if you believe that the quietest men often carry the most powerful stories, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I think you'll want to stay. It started on a Sunday in March, the kind of cool, pale-skied morning my late wife Odessa would have loved. Crisp enough for a cardigan, still enough to leave the back door open. She passed 3 years ago this spring, and I still make her red beans and cornbread on Sundays like some kind of standing prayer. The house feels less empty when it smells like her kitchen. That is not a small thing, and I do not pretend it is. My daughter Lydia and her husband came by at noon. Lydia came through the door the way she always did, arms open, moving like she'd never really left. She held on to me longer than usual, and I breathed in the familiar scent of her hair, and I thought, as I do every time, that I had done at least one thing right in this life. Stafford followed her in. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, the kind of face that photographs well and reads as confident in a room full of strangers. He shook my hand with both of his, the double grip of a man who had read too many books about making impressions. "Jerome," he said, showing every tooth he owned, "you look sharp as always. Something smells incredible." He said the same thing every Sunday. Odessa used to say that a person who recycles compliments is a person who's never truly paying attention. I had come to understand she was right about that, as she was right about most things. Lydia moved toward the kitchen to help with the table. Stafford moved toward the window in the living room that faced the side lot, the one that borders the neighbor's property. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking out at nothing in particular, the way a man looks at something he is already picturing without the people in it. "Nice piece of property over here," he said, as if commenting on the weather. "That was Odessa's garden," I said. I kept my voice easy, the way you keep your hands easy when you are very focused. He nodded slowly. The garden was not what he was thinking about. We sat down to eat. The meal had the pleasant surface tension of still water over a current. Lydia talked about the gallery where she worked, about a young printmaker she'd been promoting. She had her mother's gift for finding beauty in small things and making other people see it too. Stafford ate mechanically, contributing enough words to pass for engaged, his eyes moving every few minutes toward the hallway at the back of the house, the one that led to my study, where I kept my files and my drafting table and the notary stamp I had used for 30 years of property transactions. He had been in that room exactly once, 2 Christmases ago, when he asked to use my printer. He had stood in the doorway for a moment before I joined him, and I had noticed his eyes going to the filing cabinet in the corner, with a glance that was too specific to be idle. I had filed the memory away the way you file anything you can't yet explain. Now I was filing it differently. Lydia set down her fork midway through the meal and looked at her husband with an expression I had seen before and never liked, the particular hopefulness of a person who is about to ask something they have been coached on. "Stafford's been working on a development project," she said carefully. "Midtown. It could really be something, Daddy, if the financing comes through." Stafford's jaw tightened. "Lydia, we talked about this." "I'm just saying." I said I'd handle it. The edge in his voice was brief but definite, the kind you're not supposed to notice. He turned to me with a smile that was performing steadiness. "Don't pay attention to her. She worries. You know how it is." I said I did. I wore what Odessa used to call my Sunday face, pleasant, warm, giving nothing away. After they left, I stood in the kitchen and listened to the house settle around me. I sat in the chair by the window, the one I had had since our first apartment in Orange Mound, and I thought, with the quiet focus that 32 years of engineering problems had trained into me. I thought about what I had watched across that dinner table. I thought about what Stafford had said, and more importantly, about what he had not said, about where his eyes had gone when he thought mine were elsewhere. And I thought about Odessa. She had never fully trusted my son-in-law. She had never said so outright, because she was a fair woman who did not convict on instinct alone. But I had watched her around him. The way her smile stayed at surface level when he spoke, the way she found reasons to be in another room when he held court in this one. A month before she died, she had taken my hand and said plainly, "Jerome, promise me you'll watch out for Lydia, not just from the outside, from the inside." I had promised. I was only now beginning to understand what the promise required. I heard it close to 11 that night. His voice, just below the kitchen window, low and urgent, the cadence of a man who believes he is not being overheard. I turned off the kitchen light and stood very still in the dark. "He keeps the notary stamp in his desk," Stafford was saying. "I saw it 2 years ago. The Beale Street deed is in the same room. I could see the filing cabinet from the doorway." A pause. "He doesn't suspect a thing. He's old school, trusts people. I just need one night in that study, and I can get the transfer document signed and stamped before anyone knows what happened." A longer pause, listening. "Lydia doesn't need to know the details. She just needs to know the house is safe." I stood in the dark kitchen for a long time after he moved away. I am not a man who comes apart easily. I have buried my parents, buried friends I made in the working years, buried my wife. I have learned to hold grief the way you hold a very hot thing, carefully, just long enough, then set it down before it burns through. But standing there in the dark, listening to my daughter's husband plan to forge my name on a property transfer, I felt something grief alone cannot account for. It was the specific weight of a man who has spent every year of his adult life building something, and looked up to find someone already reaching for it. I set that feeling down, and I started thinking like an engineer. I called Reginald Morse the next morning. Reginald had been my attorney for 22 years, since he was fresh out of Memphis law with a chip on his shoulder and a thrift store briefcase. He had drafted Odessa's estate documents, structured the trust, and reviewed every contract I had ever touched. He answered on the second ring, and I heard him hear something in my voice. I laid out what I had overheard, all of it. When I finished, he was quiet. "The Beale Street property is already in the irrevocable trust," he said. "He can't transfer it without both our signatures, regardless of what he forges." "I know that," I said. "That's not why I called." A shorter silence. "You want him to show you exactly who he is?" "I want my daughter to see it," I said, without any way for him to explain it away afterward. Reginald understood the distinction. He always has. The real documents were in his office by that afternoon. Every deed, every certificate, every piece of paper that held actual value. In the filing cabinet where they had been, I placed a clean, plausible-looking stack. A property summary with the Beale Street address, some round number value figures, a blank signature line, convincing enough for a man who would be nervous and in a hurry and seeing what he wanted to see. On top of the stack, I set a sealed envelope. I wrote on the front of it in my block printing, the lettering I use when I want a thing to be read clearly, for Stafford. "Open only if you came here without being invited." Then I placed my digital voice recorder, a small device I had used for 30 years of meeting notes, on the shelf behind a row of engineering references angled toward the desk. Tennessee is a one-party consent state. Anything recorded in my own home, on my own equipment, was mine to use however I saw fit. Reginald had confirmed this without my even having to ask. And then I waited. I did not have to wait long. I mentioned to Lydia on a Tuesday phone call, casually and in passing, that I was planning to drive up to Nashville to visit my cousin, and might leave as early as Thursday morning. I knew she would mention it to Stafford. I knew he would look at that window of time the way a man looks at an open door. He came on Wednesday night. I heard the front door at 1:23 in the morning. He had a key. Had for 2 years, Lydia had given it to him for emergencies. I supposed he had decided this qualified. I sat in the dark of my bedroom and listened to his footsteps move down the hall. Careful, deliberate, the footsteps of a man who has rehearsed the route in his head. The study door opened, a long silence, the filing cabinet drawer sliding out, then in. And then another silence, different in quality from the first. He had found the envelope. I sat in my chair in the dark, and I thought about my father. I thought about Isaiah Haskell, who came to Memphis from Clarksdale in 1936 with $12 and a trade he had learned from his own father. Who built Haskell's Fine Cleaners on Beale Street into an institution, pressing the suits of preachers and principals and businessmen for 31 years. Who, in 1967, was handed a check for $4,200 and told his building was being acquired for the good of the city, for urban renewal, for progress, in that particular language cities use when they mean something else entirely. Who never opened another shop. Who sat very quietly in a chair by a window for the rest of his life, the way things that have been broken in the center sometimes sit, still on the outside, something gone from the inside. Who told me, when I was 17 and furious on his behalf, in the patient voice of a man who has decided not to be destroyed, "Don't be angry, Jerome. Be smarter than they expect." I had spent my life trying to honor that instruction. The recorder caught everything Stafford said in that room. I listened to it the next morning at the kitchen table, my coffee going cold beside me. He had been silent for a long time after finding the envelope, long enough that I had wondered if he'd simply taken the stamp and left without reading. But then his voice came through the small speaker in the particular register of a man talking to himself in the dark, trying to understand what he was looking at. "What the hell is this?" Then a phone call, made from my study in the early morning hours. He told the man on the other end that the documents were a problem, that the transfer might be more complicated than planned, that he'd figure something else out. His voice was still trying to sound in control. It did not sound in control. What had stopped him was what the envelope contained. A photocopy of a 1967 Memphis City Council document authorizing the urban renewal acquisition of properties along the 300 block of Beale Street. My father's business was listed among the displaced. Haskell's Fine Cleaners, proprietor, I. Haskell. Compensation offered, $4,200. Beneath it was a second document, the subsequent land transfer record showing the cleared parcel conveyed to Blake Development Company. The principal listed was Sinclair M. Blake, Stafford's grandfather. And beneath both was a single page in my handwriting. I had written it 3 times before I got it the way I wanted it. Not hot, not long, just exact. Your grandfather used the city's machinery to take my father's life's work for $4,200. My father never recovered. I spent 30 years saving, working, and learning, and 12 years ago, I bought a piece of that same block back. You came into this house tonight to take it from me the way your family took it from mine. The only difference between you and Sinclair Blake is 60 years. I know exactly who you are, Stafford. And now you do too. He was in the study for 11 minutes. Then I heard him leave. The front door closed with a sound that was almost quiet enough to be mistaken for something else. I called Lydia the next morning and asked her and her husband to come by. I gave no explanation. I heard the worry in her voice and the flat, careful steadiness in his when she told him. He was standing nearby, I could tell. He thought he had read the situation correctly. He thought the envelope was the end of it. An old man's attempt at a warning that had cost him nothing but a sleepless night. He came to my house that afternoon, looking like someone who had already started spending what he hadn't yet managed to take. Lydia sat on the couch. Stafford chose the chair farthest from me, the way a man sits when he wants to stay near the door. I set the recorder on the coffee table without saying anything. Then I pressed play. His voice filled the room. What the hell is this? Then the phone call, every word of it, the stamp, the transfer document, the complications, the pivot. The voice of a man planning to sign my name to a paper I had never seen, in my house, in the dark, while he believed I was in Nashville. Lydia went very still. I watched her the way you watch a sky that is about to break, not wanting to see it, unable to look away. I watched the moment recognition reached her face, then meaning, then understanding. It crossed her in slow stages, the way something enormous always does. She turned and looked at Stafford with an expression I had never seen from her before. Not rage, not disbelief, something quieter and more permanent than either of those. Recognition of something she had been refusing to recognize for a long time. Stafford opened his mouth. "Don't," she said. That was all. He closed it. I turned off the recorder, and then I told them the rest, about Isaiah Haskell, about Haskell's Fine Cleaners, about the 1967 acquisition and the $4,000 check and the name Blake Development Company in the chain of title, about finding that record 15 years ago when I was doing due diligence on the Beale Street property I was considering buying, and feeling the floor shift under me when I understood what I was reading. About buying it anyway, not as a statement, not even fully conscious of the symmetry in the moment, but because something in me had needed to plant a flag on that particular ground. For my father. For what he had lost. For what I intended to hold. "I did not know your last name was Blake when Lydia brought you home," I said. My voice was steady in the way that things are steady when the grief underneath them has already been settled. I did not connect it until much later. By then, I had decided a man is not his grandfather. I wanted to believe you were proof of that. Stafford was looking at his hands. "But you walked into this house and looked at everything I built, and all you saw was what you could take from it. Your grandfather walked into my father's life's work and saw the same thing. I don't know if that is coincidence or inheritance. Either way, it ends here." I told him I was not pressing charges. The recording was sufficient to take to a prosecutor, and he knew it. I could see him calculating exactly what he was sitting across from. But I had thought about this the way I think about everything that matters. A legal proceeding would give him lawyers and delays and the slow fog of process, and at the end of it he would walk out the same man, only more careful about which houses he entered in the dark. That was not a punishment. That was a lesson he would use. "Your sentence," I said quietly, "is the truth. You know what you are now. You know what your family was. You have to decide every day for the rest of your life what to do with that. That is not something you can appeal or negotiate. It will be there every morning when you wake up." He stood without speaking. He left without looking at either of us. The door closed behind him with a finality that did not need to be loud to be complete. Lydia sat on the couch for a long time after. I brought her tea and sat beside her and did not try to fill the silence, because a father's job in certain moments is simply to remain. When she finally spoke, her voice was the voice of a woman who has passed through something and come out the other side knowing exactly where she is. "I need to call a lawyer," she said. "Reginald's number is on the refrigerator," I said. "He'll take your call today." She almost smiled. "You had all of this ready." "I had some of it ready," I said. "The rest I learned from your mother." The divorce was finalized 7 months later, without contest. I think Stafford understood, in whatever clear-eyed hours greed allows, that he had no ground left to stand on. On a Saturday in October, Lydia and I drove down to the Beale Street property together. 2 stories, red brick, modest by any standard, in need of fresh trim paint. We stood on the sidewalk in the fall light, and I told her things I had never told her, about her grandfather Isaiah, about the shop, about the check for $4,200, and the chair by the window and the patient, devastating instruction he had handed down to me. Be smarter than they expect. She listened the way she has always listened, completely, with her hands still and her attention full, the way Odessa taught her without ever naming the lesson. "So all of it," she said when I had finished. "The house, this building, everything you and Mama saved for me." She looked at the brick facade, the old glass windows, the city moving past behind us. "It all goes back to him." "Everything goes back to somebody," I said. "That's not the point. The point is what you carry forward." She reached over and put her hand in mine, the way she did when she was small, and the world felt larger than she knew what to do with. "I have been asked whether I carry anger over any of this, over what Stafford tried to do, over what his grandfather did to my father, over the decades between those 2 events when justice moved so slowly it was nearly invisible. The honest answer is that I do not. I am something quieter than angry. I am the son of a man who lost everything and told me to be smarter. I am the husband of a woman who showed me, every day of our life together, that the real inheritance is never the money. It is the character you choose, room by room and year by year, whether anyone is watching or not. I built my life on those 2 truths. No one can deed them away. And I know this. The most valuable thing I have ever held was not in a filing cabinet or an irrevocable trust, or a deed recorded at the county courthouse. It was in my daughter's hand, on a sidewalk in Memphis, in the October light, deciding who she was going to be. That inheritance has been growing for a long time. No one is ever going to take it from her. If this story moved you, I hope you'll consider subscribing to Molten Vengeance. There are more stories like this one, Ordinary people who refuse to be small. Your support is what keeps them coming. Hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.